Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast, your Friday edition of the show. I'm Matt Preem, Eric Scopel, Jaron Mack, all on the podcast today, and it's kind of a mixture of things. We're going to look ahead a little bit to the spring game next Saturday. We're about a week out, and we're also going to dive into just some quick conversation of a couple players we spoke with this week. Johnny Cornelius, a transfer offensive lineman, one of the top transfer portal players along the offensive line. We also spoke with Jaleel Florence, a sophomore corner who came to Oregon with a lot of expectations, got on the field in 2022, and now feels like a bigger role. Let's start there because Jamal Hill's moved from nickel to star to linebacker. There's been some rotations in and out of the secondary. Cornerback feels like maybe the position we have an idea that, that's solid. The group of guys is solid there. Like we know kind of like who's in the mix, maybe who's not starting, but the names are kind of there. Everywhere else kind of seems like it's in flux, at least from my perspective. Jaleel Florence is one of those dudes. Eric, you spoke with him. Really talented recruit, 4-star guy. I think he was a top 100, top 150 type player. Played in quite a bit of games for Oregon this past season and was at corner. And now it feels like he's in that mix where he's moving around a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the big stories of this spring, and it seems like it's every spring. So it's maybe not a big story, but just something we come to expect, which is they're going to be cross-training guys and giving players an opportunity to play a couple different spots. And that's certainly what Jaleel's spring has been like so far. We've seen him out there at corner, so obviously he's playing there, but I also see he's playing a lot of nickel. And I guess the first thing I think of is typically this is about when you would start cross-training. I know last year he was here, but Dan said that they didn't want to, I think in year one, really throw too much at guys. So let's establish kind of a foundation at one spot. And so that spot was corner, which was also the position he played primarily in high school. I know he said a little bit in the slot, but now he's kind of getting an opportunity to play a couple different places. And he seemed really excited by it because the general kind of idea he seems to communicate, I don't know if this is the coach's staff or if this is just the cornerback room, but they want to try to get as many corners in the field at once, he said. And so, Triquez Bridges, a guy who was a corner last year, is getting some run at safety. Jaleel, a guy who was, again, a corner entirely last year, is on the field at nickel. And you could get into some spots here where players you have at least histories at Oregon playing corner, that there could be, 3 or 4 or 5 of those guys in the field at once at times, maybe not 5, but, several of those guys could be out there together. And I think that's kind of the idea, especially when you think back to some of the issues they had a year ago with coverage, is let's get our best coverage guys in the field at once. And they certainly have guys who are highly rated corners. I mean, I think that's the part you have to remember here is, if you want to compare just from a recruiting ranking, and you can talk at length about why that maybe isn't the right choice, but the guys at corner on Oregon's roster are most of them are very, very highly rated recruits. And you look at the guys at safety, some of them were 4 stars and some of them were pretty highly rated, but for the most part, not quite the same caliber. So if you can get creative and find ways to get, to Jaleel's point, 3 to 4 of those guys out there together makes some sense. And of course, during the spring is the perfect time to be doing some of that experimenting. So not surprised necessarily, but I guess intrigued, and we'll get to some things we're looking forward to in the spring game later on the show. That might be something I'm curious to see, is just how many of these guys can you get out there in coverage, and how does that impact things on passing downs, where, again, a year ago, that wasn't always a real positive for Oregon.
Definitely intriguing. I think it's the most intriguing for the part that you just ended with, Eric. Like, clearly Oregon's defense was pretty putrid at points against the pass, and they needed to find some sort of an answer. And whether that be moving Triquez Bridges back to safety, or to cornerback, or putting Dante Manning at star, Jaleel Florence at star, I appreciate that they're mixing and matching and trying to find what's best. And I also think that they're mixing and matching because they're significantly more talented individuals in the cornerback room than there are in the safety room, like you were mentioning, Eric. And that's not to say that there isn't talent in the safety room, because there is. I mean, when you have guys like Brian Addison and Steve Stevens projected to probably come off the pine as guys who have started a lot of games in their careers, more Stevens than Addison. Like, that's a good thing. That's a sign of good depth. But I think that this is an interesting development. I'm not sure what it really means because, again, last season we saw Bridges and Brian Addison be the starting safeties, or not starting safeties, but the first group defensive safeties for an entire spring portion. And then neither of them really were Bridges definitely was not a starting safety, and Brian Addison rarely started last season. So I think that they're just still going through like a trial and error process, more or less, and just seeing if this positional versatility, if these guys have it and own it and are good at it. I'm not sure if who are we talking about? Jaleel Florence is going to stick at star or nickel. We'll see about that one. I'm not 100% sure about that. I still think Tysheem Johnson is going to be the guy who comes out as the everyday defensive star safety, but at least they're trying. They're trying to do something because they needed a lot of help last year, and they're going to look to get it now this year.
I wonder how much of this is a move to just get better coverage out on the field.
That's the whole move. Yeah.
No,
Like,
I think you nailed it.
And a reason for that is James Crepea, the Oregonian, pointed this out, that a lot of the teams in the conference now have gone away that used to run like double tight end or fullback, or like they don't do that nearly as often anymore. Stanford's going spread. Washington isn't double tight end like they used to, at least in the old division world. Utah still does. Cal probably not next season. Oregon State is kind of like a hybrid, so you're seeing more teams go to these offenses that are going to have more receivers out there, and this just feels like a reaction to that. Let's try and see if we can get another corner out there. And to Jared's point, like I would agree. I still think Tysheem Johnson's going to be the guy that probably mans that nickel position, but that's what spring's for. Like, let's try Jaleel Florence at nickel and see if it works and if he's better than Tysheem Johnson, because you certainly wouldn't try that last year during the season.
And I think, another thing we were just talking about on our previous show that speaks to, I think, the vision that this staff has this offseason in terms of getting better in coverage is the Jamal Hill part. I think there are so many of these. You just look at the positional moves and kind of where they've worked this offseason. Like, it's pretty clear that they went and said, we didn't have the right personnel in the field to cover teams last year, and we're going to try to get as many guys. Like, it's possible. Like, if you want to think about Bossa and Hill as being converted defensive backs, which they are. I know obviously Bossa that predates Lanning, but you could look at this defense and there could be times where like literally like 7 of the guys are former defensive backs. Like, that speaks to kind of what I think the aim here is, Matt. And your first point that you kind of started with there, I think, is the perfect one, and maybe something that we haven't maybe established enough on this podcast, or maybe we're just kind of starting to become into clearer view with some of these position moves. But yeah, I think it's very clear that's a focal point this offseason, is trying to get as many of your best coverage guys in the field at once, because clearly a year ago, I don't think we need to say it too many times, like, people understand the issues they had, and you put out 7 to 8 guys who at least have history playing defensive back, and obviously that means more experience in coverage. Like, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. And then to your Tysheem Johnson thing, I think he still is the nickel. I think he's the guy there, but having Florence be somebody who you could maybe incorporate into a couple of other packages, or even kind of fill in at times, or maybe certain matchups he's better against certain personnel groups. Like, I just think having him have experience in other places makes a ton of sense. And ultimately that's what the goal is in spring, is getting it prepared to the point where you don't have to throw a guy into practice a week before playing in a game at a spot he's never repped before, and you're getting that work done now. So at least come fall, whether or not Jaleel stays there, he'll have had some experience working in the nickel.
Let's move to Johnny Cornelius. First time to speak with him. First time to see him post practice too. I was just really surprised at, like, he doesn't look like your typical offensive lineman. He's not really overweight. Very well built dude though. I was talking with Nate Kruger, Oregon's SID, while he was speaking, and he said he might become a staple interview guy. And so far in practice, he's a freak athlete. And you see that with his body type. He's not what you would expect from an offensive lineman. He looks more like a tight end, defensive end type body type. Really athletic dude. And we got some insight onto, and Jared, I think, can speak to this, of just why he chose Oregon, because there really wasn't any articles done about it when he committed. And he was one of, if not the most high profile tackle in the entire portal this offseason.
Yeah, no, Cornelius was a guy who had over 20, I think, offers after he entered the transfer portal from Rhode Island. And he picked Oregon. He went to official visits to Ohio State and Tennessee, picked Oregon. I think we were all happy about that. But now this is the first time to talk to him. Not only does he not look like a prototypical offensive tackle in terms of physique, which I don't think is a bad thing. He's just a long and lanky lad. He doesn't sound like anybody else in this roster, which I thought was the best part about it. It's a kid from Harlem. He went to Rhode Island, originally like a Howard commit. I think we went over that together. But he just said that it was a gut feeling at first on taking the trip out to Oregon and really coming into contact with them. Johnny also said that on the phone, Dan Lanning just made Cornelius believe in him. Basically, just preached to the choir, got him in the growth mindset, and Cornelius believed in what Dan was doing. And he talked to Bo a lot when he was here on the visit. He stayed with Marcus Harper, and they talked a lot about their determination and goals that they want to see in the next season. And from there, it just seemed like that Oregon was the place. Eventually he commits to Oregon and is now going through his first spring practice, first spring camp as a Duck. And he's mentioned what was the most surprising was, he admitted that the competition level was significantly different than what it was at Rhode Island. And, from 1,000-foot perspective, of course, it's Rhode Island versus University of Oregon. But it's interesting when a player sometimes will admit the obvious and sometimes will admit this is different than what I expected. But that type of competition level he said that it forced him to raise his own, and that he loves it. This is the type of stuff that he wants to go through. These are the type of players that he wants to go against. He listed Mateo Uiagalelei, Jordan Birch, and Brandon Dorless as guys who have given him some trouble in practice. Maybe not trouble, but have given him some competitive reps at practice. And each time he goes through against one of those guys, that adds to his game, helps him improve. He mentioned that he and Jordan are good friends off the field as well. But once they get back onto the field, it turns into a competitive mode. It's that iron sharpens iron mentality. So it was really, really nice to talk to a Johnny, well-spoken kid, somebody who who I'm projecting as a starter at right tackle this season, who I think is going to be a household name by the end of the season with his length and versatility and his athleticism on the offensive line.
Can I pose a question just about the offensive tackle thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is because I think Oregon has two guys in Connerly and Cornelius who, to Matt's point, don't look like the offensive tackles that Oregon has had come through there. I think that speaks more to just how special these specific type of athletes are and how rare they are, because Oregon for the last, Sewell was a little bit different. I just think in terms of the girth and overall size compared to these guys, but Oregon just hasn't had a lot of guys with this sort of athleticism that can carry it that way. I think that's what stands out with those two guys is how they carry their weight. Of course, official weights haven't been listed, but I think we expect both of those guys to be around or at 300, a little bit over maybe. I think it was Harper was saying he thought Connerly was over 300, which would be a nice little weight gain for him. But just a thought I had, because I know this offseason we spoke so many times about how this last year's team just didn't have tackle bodies that many. I think Connerly was kind of the unique guy there. I think what we're seeing with Cornelius, and I even maybe throw George Silva into that, is just these bigger, longer, more angular, more athletic guys. I just think Oregon has some bodies that they just haven't had in a while. We'll see how that plays out in the field, but not that it's that unique of an insight, but just kind of Matt's point about how these don't look like tackles. I think it's maybe less to do with, I think it's more like what kind of tackles that you've seen come through Oregon recently. These guys are not at all similar to them, but in terms of being freak athletes, these are some pretty unique guys.
it's going to be unfair to do this, but physique-wise, they look very similar to Panay, in my opinion. Like, Panay just did not look like an offensive lineman. He was naturally big, naturally strong, and just didn't have to throw on a bunch of weight to play at that level. And that's what Connerly and that's what I felt like Ajani looked like. They're just naturally really long, really big, really athletic dudes, and they don't have to load up to get to the playing weight that you sometimes see offensive linemen. Like I remember seeing Brady Ayala a couple years ago after he left, after he shut down his pursuit of the NFL and trying to get on a roster. I saw him at a dog park and he lost so much weight I didn't recognize him. And that was what was required of him, though, to play at Oregon and to play at the pro levels. He had to have so much extra weight on to be able to withstand, the position. And Sewell didn't have to do that. And it doesn't look like, at least on paper, Cornelius and Connerly do either. And that's, to your point, Eric, like you don't see that very often at Oregon, and the athleticism that those guys have could lead to some really interesting, really fun, really good years potentially for this year and next.
What they look like is NFL tackles. That's what they look like. You look at guys across the league like Laramie Tunsil or Trent Brown, those just gargantuan human beings who don't look it. Like, obviously they're going to be taller than everybody else. Like Trent Brown, I think is 6'8" or 6'9". So he's going to be just such a massive human being, but they don't look significantly bigger than anybody else on the offensive line because they're not. And they're just huge, massive guys who can move around and have tremendous versatility on the offensive line, and then have tremendous athleticism and quickness and agility as well. And that's what you've seen, at least in the glimmers and the glimpses at practice of Josh Connerly, of Silva, and of Ajani Cornelius. I am extremely excited to watch those guys in the spring game, which is something that we may or may not get to later on in this podcast about some names that we'd like to drop. But those are three dudes that I'm extremely, I'm looking forward to seeing all of them, because like you guys have both mentioned, there haven't been a lot of bodies like that. And I still think that they're all a little bit different than Panay, because I think Panay was at least a little bit more put together. He was heavier of a guy, but not because he was like just bigger or not because he was like fat or anything like that. He's just a bigger dude. And he was just this unbelievable blend of athleticism and big person that I don't think that Silva and Cornelius and Connerly are, but they're a different type of blend. And it's not a bad thing, but it's NFL tackle bodies is what they look like. Panay was a little different, but that's not a bad thing for him either. But these are NFL tackle bodies.
The distinction I make between Sewell and these guys is, I think, remember, Sewell came in at 330, 340.
360.
Was it that much? I know he came in had to lose weight. Connerly didn't come at a high weight. Looking at Cornelius as a prep, it's like these guys basically came in at 280, 290. You had to gain weight to get to 300. Panay started at whatever it was. If it was really 360, that's wild. And had to come down.
Yeah, I just looked at the depth. I looked at the roster while we were talking, and I'll do it again, but I'm very confident it was 360.
So, but that's the distinction I'd make, is I think Sewell came in so well put together, had to cut down, and then you saw those athletic intangibles. Other guys maybe had to add some weight, which is something we know Connerly's at least has done since he's gotten here.
Let's transition. I'm gonna call an audible real quick before we go to break, because this doesn't take very long. Did you guys see the new rule change in college football today? Just happened. Dennis
did. Posted on the Autzen, the Duck Territory message board about it.
Yeah. First down clock does no longer stop on first down. Going to the NFL move. Division 1, Division 2 will have it. Division 3, for some reason, said, no thanks, we're out. We do not want that.
It's going to be one of those things that we probably forget about, and then it will be something that becomes very obvious early on. They're like, oh yeah, they did change that. That's right, that happened back in April, but I'd forgotten. But which is oftentimes some of these rules. I feel like that's what happens, where it's like, oh, that seems interesting, and then you get to the fall and you go, oh, that is pretty interesting.
That did happen. I mean, the only time it really came into play was at Washington State and maybe Utah or Washington when they were trying to make the comeback there. One of those two. Can't remember.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Washington probably.
I don't like it. I'll just go out on a limb and say that. I don't like it at all. I think it was a clear separator between college football and the NFL. Both leagues have their own individual quirks, I would say, and this was one of college football's. And to eliminate it, I'm not really sure the reason why. If you'd like to cut down on game time, then you're gonna have to take away money from all of the streaming services, because you need to eliminate how many commercials are going on during a game if you don't want to have that long air time. If you want to cut down on game time, there are plenty of other ways. Believe me. Maybe, I don't know, get replay systems better. Maybe put a limit on how quickly you can challenge a play or a call or whatever the case may be. I don't know, maybe don't do sideline interviews in the middle of a game. Maybe speed up the process there. If you're looking to do that, this is a much different approach than actually it's the very similar approach to what baseball did and tried to change like the fundamental rules of the game. This will not work. And if you're trying to fix up or speed up the game, because it's already been going on in the NFL, like I said, for decades and decades and decades. And guess what? Those games are pretty long. So the stopping of the clock on a first down isn't going to make a difference if that's what they're going after. And I don't see what else they would be doing other than just prepping guys for the NFL immediately.
Yeah. I'm going to agree with Jared real quick. I don't like it. I hate it. I think it's dumb. Creating a problem when there wasn't one.
Mm-hmm.
Works for me. Yeah. I hate it. We'll all hate it together.
Good.
All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive into some spring football, spring game talk. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. We're going to talk players for the spring game. And I want to just make it clear, these aren't guys, at least my picks, aren't guys I think are going to like show out and have massive performances. Some of them I think that would be true, but these are just guys that I think I want to see them step up and have a big moment, or B, they kind of need to build some positive momentum, or they could maybe see them go off to the portal if they don't really feel like they're making much of an impact on the game, because lack of playing time could be coming their way. I'll go first. I'll list off. I have a tandem here, and it's just because I want this debate to continue to rage on, and I think it will rage on, and it will go through the entire season. I'm selecting Chris Hudson and Tez Johnson. I want to see both guys have big games in the spring game, have big impacts, because we've debated it at length on this show. It's very clear that they want more out of that position in the slot spot. They brought in Tez. They may have Gary Bryant Jr. committed here in a couple weeks to also play that position. But I want this competition to bleed over into the season, and we see a back and forth of who starts, who doesn't start, who plays more, just these two guys both playing good. So I hope we see Chris Hudson and Tez Johnson both have big games in the spring game. So we have a whole debate all summer long of this guy's better or no, this guy's better.
Or they play different positions the entire game, and they're on the field together the entire game, and we go, hey, these guys can work together, which is
very true.
I don't think that's going to be what they do from a base perspective, but it is worth noting that when we watched that period of fastball, that was the top group, was those two guys out there together with Tez in the slot and Chris out at the Z position. So we'll see. I don't know. I think I'm totally with you though, Matt. Like they didn't add Tez Johnson by accident, and everything we've heard is he's had an awesome spring. We've also heard Chris Hudson's had a pretty darn good spring. So it should be fun to kind of track those guys out there at receiver. If we're going offense to start, I know you said we didn't have to do that, but I'm going to. we just talked about the guys I'm most excited about it on offense, probably, which is just the offensive line and how that all shakes out. Because I think we've seen so much across the board, and I'm sure there are other positions that we can address, and I won't name them because I don't want to steal Jared's possible thunder in future picks here, or Matt's. But I just think we talked about Johnny, we talked about George, we talked about Josh, but like those tackles in particular, I'm just really curious to see the way that they operate facing against, we think, a defense that has a little bit more steam, or hopefully a little bit more steam off the edge, with Jordan Birch, with Mateo Uiagalelei, who's, I know, a freshman, but it seems like he's getting a lot of positive press this spring, if you will, from teammates and coaches. I just really want to see how those guys kind of stack up, and also kind of how they fit together. I know that was one of the things that we kind of talked about at the end of our show earlier this week. I'm hoping the format allows it so that we can see what it looks like when those are the two tackles in the field together. That would be something that would be very interesting for me to watch, because it's been a long time since Oregon, and maybe ever, that they've had these type of athletes at the two tackles, if we're talking about Connerly and Cornelius. So I'm juiced up and excited to just kind of see what those guys might look like together. And then there's a bunch of stuff, in some of the interior spots. We talked about the center position or before, but I'll kind of leave it there so Jared has more runway to pick from, I guess.
I mean, you already picked my guys, so it's a shame. That's why I, kind of alluded to it during our tackles segment earlier, because those were going to be my peoples. But I'm going to go, I guess, with some more obsolete offensive cast characters here that I think could turn themselves into somebody who gets talked about during the offseason, and Kyler Casper. Again, this is a highly rated recruit that reclassified to the 2022 class. Didn't play too often last season. Certainly had moments during practice where he's like a solid 6'5", 6'6" wide receiver who could play that X position, probably even play the Z position. But it's a guy who we haven't heard much about. But I think most of the questions that we've oriented and the responses that we've heard have been a lot about the slot position receiver. And rightfully so, because that's where the competition is. But it's a guy who I think is extremely talented, who's long, who's versatile, who I think can make an impact for this team, given kind of the wide receiver depth concerns that I would say kind of are on this offense, where if you go past your fourth or fifth wide receiver, there's some opportunity for somebody to get to step in and make a play at becoming a real good bench receiver. And I think Kyler Casper could be that guy. I'll be interested to see what quarterback he's throwing to. If somebody wants to drop a quarterback name to watch for the spring game, I'll be interested to see who that is, because it's probably going to be with the second team. And I'll be interested to see just what defensive backs he goes against too, because that could be a limitation with a guy with his size, but he's still young, so he's kind of a skinny lad. It'll be interesting to see who he goes against and how he performs against said defensive back. I really like Casper. I saw a couple things from him last year during practice that I kind of jotted down in my memory. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he's improved upon during the offseason.
I should note I didn't pick any offensive linemen just because I think that's a hard one for a spring game, because we don't know the format, and we might see some mix and match combos like we saw last year with DJ Johnson matching up against Bailey Jaramillo. That would never happen in a game. I wanted to mention I want to see Ty Thompson do good.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
I'd love to see it. I'm going to switch to defense though, and I'm going to select three guys because they all basically kind of play the same position, and I'm sure I'm going to steal one of your guys' names. Birch, Mateo, and Tuioti. Those three. Birch, because we've heard a lot. We've seen Dan say he's got all the the intangibles, that they do a drill and that's what it should look like when he does it. Mateo, we've seen Tosh praise him as well. You just want to see it on the field. I just want to see what he looks like in a Duck uniform. So I'm excited to see that. I want to see him do well. And then Mateo and Tuioti, two prospects who could make impacts in certain roles this coming season. Both guys signed to help improve the pass rush. That we know that's a big weakness. And maybe they can make an impact early too.
couple of things on offense I just wanted to say before. I don't know if Jared might have lingering offensive thoughts, so he can obviously add those if he wants to. Junior Angelau was wearing cleats for the first time on Thursday. I don't know if he's going to take part in the spring game or not, obviously, but that's just something to maybe we're getting close to seeing the first glimpse of him in an Oregon uniform, which would be something I would at least just want to see. I would imagine they're going to be very careful with him. So maybe we don't see him, maybe we see him for a very short period of time. But that's just something I just wanted to toss out there as just a name and a kind of a development we haven't touched on offensively. Jared, did you have anything else on offense that you want? Any other names you wanted to add there? Go for it. You want to?
Center competition.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a real thing. I think that
No bad snaps.
No bad snaps. I think that's going to be something that we all kind of look for. We'll jot down, see how many, if there are any, because it seems like it's a full-fledged battle between Marcus Harper and Jackson Powers-Johnson. And I think that those are two very capable offensive linemen. Both are capable centers. I think we all went into the season expecting it to just be JPJ as the starting center, but I think Harper has turned some heads because I think, again, that if Junior Aguilar is healthy, he's going to be one of the starting guards with Stephen Jones on the other spot. And there's going to be two guys battling for center for the last starting offensive line position. And it seems like it's a real battle. So that's another offensive thing I'm thinking about. I also want to see the new running backs with Dante Dowdell and Jalen Lamar. Those are two guys who Coach Lachlan, who talked yesterday, had some nice things to say about them, more nice things to say about himself, but I digress. Those are some names just to watch. And then Trayshawn Holden, Alabama transfer wide receiver, just all the new guys, kind of similar to Matt's point where it's like, I just want to see this guy in a Duck uniform and see what he looks like out there. Trayshawn Holden.
To the center thing, I just thought of this, Matt. This is maybe a question. We've been the ones following this longer. When was the last time Oregon actually had a center competition, like an actual center competition in spring? And I say that because it's almost always felt like it's been a clear heir apparent for like, and then that guy's been the guy for like 3 or 4 seasons. It's been a while, I think, since like we've had a real competition like this way, John, at that position.
Yeah, Forsyth was just kind of like the natural progression in at center after Hansen. I'm trying to think who was the center. The 15 center was a transfer.
It was pre-Hansen.
It was Matt Haggerty, I think.
Yeah, right? Haggerty from Notre Dame.
He was there for a year.
That one was pretty definitive. Like they went and added him directly after Grasu graduated, and they replaced him there. Trying to think, like 2011 was Grasu. Yeah, Grasu was a redshirt freshman. That was probably it. 2011. Because Grasu hadn't really established himself yet.
Who was he competing with? I just don't even remember who he was competing with at that point. So if that was the last center competition, it's been over a decade. And to the guys who follow this program closer than just about anybody else, can't remember who Grasu was actually competing with.
I'm looking at past depth charts. Hronis Grasu was listed as a starter, obviously, for the LSU game. And then Carrington Armstrong and then Hamani Stevens as a redshirt freshman. Okay.
Carrington Armstrong. I kind of remember. I think he was a walk-on who was converted or was trying to play maybe. I can't remember. But okay. So maybe that's the last one, 12 years ago. It's been a long time since we've had something like this.
Been a long time.
And that team also had Carson York. I think he had some experience playing center. And there really wasn't, looking at that group, there really wasn't anybody else that was like a definitive center player. Yeah, so it's probably 2011 when Grasu showed up and got the job. But we should also note, like, it's been a while. That was like one of my first couple of years covering the team. But he redshirted, so maybe he was like already kind of the de facto guy. Because the year before, Jordan Holmes was a senior and was really good at that spot. And maybe they just kind of knew, like, hey, this is going to be who it is. I don't know. I can't remember. But 2011 at least.
Just a thought I had there. And I think Jared named a couple of other guys offensively that stood out to me. We're comfortable moving over to some defense. I know Matt's already done that. I think for me, I've already said the name. I'll just say it again. We said it on Wednesday. Jamal Hill is a guy I'm just really excited to see what he looks like. That interview he had on Tuesday, kind of a little bit more on the vision, just kind of hearing him talk about it and how he's feeling physically, and the fact that he's actually up to 227. Not that I thought that was completely out of the realm of possibility, but that's a lot of weight to gain in not that kind of large amount of time, and that's 15 pounds in what, 3 or 4 months, and to put it on the way he's done it, where it's like looks like almost all muscle. That's impressive. So I'm just curious to see what it looks like, how he holds up at linebacker. How does he play, in the box, being forced to bring down Oregon's running backs? And Oregon has some running backs that are, big bodied guys that can run through you. So, I mean, Jared mentioned Dowdell. Obviously, we know about Jordan James. Bucky and Noah are compact physical runners. Like, how does Jamal Hill hold up against some of those guys, in the box? I'm really curious to kind of see how that plays out. And I guess there's other guys in that room that are interesting. Right? Bossa, would love to see him take some strides. Obviously, people are familiar with kind of where I stand with him, but I still see upside. Would love to see him be an improved player. And then the 2 transfer portal guys are intriguing as well with Justin Jacobs and Connor Sewell. Just haven't seen enough of them. I'm kind of curious to see what they look like. So I think the inside linebackers as a whole that's a spot where I think maybe spotlighting the most for me defensively right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good pick. My number 1 overall pick would have been Birch, but Matt has taken him, and rightfully so, as the number 1 pick. So I'm going to go with guys in the back end, guys like Tysheem Johnson and Evan Williams, because I think safety, albeit, we talked earlier in this podcast about the deplorable defensive performances against pass offenses last season. A lot of those came from the safety room. It wasn't so much the cornerbacks that was the problem on a lot of those, such as why Christian Gonzalez is going to be the top 10 draft pick next week on Thursday at 5 p.m., the 2023 NFL Draft. This is why Triquez Bridges was a solid cornerback last season, although, who knows what they're doing this spring. But that safety room last season gave up a lot of yards, and Oregon has kind of revitalized it. They've given it some new names, some new guys to go in there and try and play and keep down the passing attack. And those guys are Tysheem Johnson and Evan Williams. And those are guys that I want to go watch against a passing attack like Oregon's, where they're going to have some guys who can go out there and take some deep shots, whose wide receivers are pretty darn good, at least in the top 4 or 5, to see how Evan Williams tackles. Is he just like his brother? Is he going to be a good perimeter tackler? I imagine he will be, but we're only going to be able to see that during the spring game. So 2 guys that I'm looking forward to. Other defensive guys, just the interior defensive line, I think, is really stacked this season. Maybe there's some freshmen who get in there, and Johnny Bowens and Mykeel Gardner. But like Eric said, I'm really interested to watch the inside linebacking room and just what the rotations are, who's the first team, quote unquote, what Jamal Hill looks like, what Connor Sewell can provide if he's more of a Mac or a money linebacker, because he looks pretty bigger this year than he did on tape at Arizona State last season. Just rotational values, things like that. But more or less, I'm just really interested to see what the safety room looks like and what those rotations are.
There's I guess if you throw in Bridges, there's probably 5 guys at safety we could legitimately be like, hey, this guy, I guess 6 if we throw Tysheem in there, maybe. We wouldn't be surprised if they had one of the 2 starting spots at safety. The combinations, to Jared's point, we could see some really interesting combinations that play out during the spring game. I think that's maybe what I'm really excited for that group, because I did have safeties too listed. Do
you guys have a favorite hypothetical combination of safeties? Is there one that you go, ooh, that would be really interesting?
Yeah.
Go for it.
You'd star, nickel, whatever you want to call it, Tysheem. And then boundary safety, I'd want Evan Williams, and free safety, I'd like Brian Addison, please.
I love Brian out there, especially if it's on a passing down, because he covers so much space. And that was something that was such an issue at times of year.
As long as Triquez Bridges is only a cornerback. Because I would swap Brian Addison for Bridges if he's considered a safety, which is something Jaleel Florence said, something that Triquez Bridges has said. So it's something to maybe consider.
I don't know if I have a combo from the other with Addison's group, but I want to see Evan Williams start. I don't really care where. I want to see him start. He was really productive at Fresno State, and he's got to be on the field in some capacity. So that would be like my one guy that I would want to see start.
I think that's gonna happen, Matt. I think he's gonna start.
All right. That's going to do it for us here on this edition of the Autzen Audibles podcast. Until Monday, we'll have a breakdown maybe of the scrimmage notes that we get from it from Dan Lanning, or maybe it's a mailbag. We haven't quite decided yet. Maybe it's both.
We should do a mailbag. It's been a long time. We haven't done a mailbag. We should do one Monday.
We'll do that. All right. So we made a decision. Mailbag on Monday. We'll have a preview later on next week for the spring game, which is about a week away now. Weather is turning, so that's a good thing. Spring game looks like, knock on some wood here, that won't be played in rain. That's always a positive. And until the next one, though, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.